Je suis très enchanté de présenter le premier panel de la journée. Mon nom est André Habib, professeur à l'Université de Montréal, grand ami de la Cinémathèque. Our first panel is called Rereadings, Reuses. We will have 3 presentations. One will be presented by 3 speakers, the second one by 1 speaker, Rada, and the third presentation will be a pre-recorded presentation. Liz Watkins from University of Leeds could not be with us, but she pre-recorded a very interesting talk that we will screen at the end of the panel. Very unfortunately, the last speaker that was scheduled for the panel, Didi Chica, could not be here on time. Visa problems and other things which are unfortunately current business right now. So we're very sad that he couldn't make it to the talk. The good thing is that we will have a little bit more time for discussion. But nonetheless, I will be extremely strict on time, so 20 minutes, and there's the brutal system of cartons that will be drawn if you go overboard. So without further ado, I'd like to present the first talk of this morning. A talk that will be called Alpe Adria Underground, that will be presented by 3 people. I'll just give everybody just a minute to settle down. So we have our police that has arrived. 3 people from the Slovenian archives, the Slovenian Cinemathèque. Ivan Nedoh, who is working as the head of the archive department of the Slovenian Cinemathèque, which was established in 1996, which obtained, if I'm not mistaken, in 2000 a FIAF membership. Ivan also became, in 2010, the Cinemathèque's director. At least this is what is written here, and has built since then a large collection of Slovenian and Yugoslav experimental films with a focus on preservation, research, and promotion. And he is now, after 2 terms, this is the right thing, he's not director right now. After 2 terms as director, he returned to the archive department, where he initiated the launch of a lab for digitizing and restoring small format films, which I think we will hear about and talk about in the talk. The second speaker, it's one conference, one paper. Matevž Jerman, who is a filmmaker and curator, as well as the program director of the Ljubljana Short Film Festival. He has been working since 2009 with the program department of the Slovenian Cinemathèque, where he has focused on curating short film programs and researching special avant-garde collections in the Cinemathèque's archive. And they will also be accompanied by Xenia Leiler, who is the director of the Slovenian Cinemathèque. So we will pass on to them for 20 minutes, and I'll be back for the next presenters. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Greetings from Slovenian Cinemathèque. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I don't know from which time zone do you come, but I think that in 24 hours we will be all on Montreal time. And then we will go back and we will repeat this exercise. So let me, in the beginning, just a few words about Slovenian Cinemathèque. It's a small but vibrant cultural institution dedicated to the appreciation, preservation, and contextualization of film heritage. Its roots take back in 1963, when it serves as Ljubljana Hall of the Yugoslav Cinemathèque. After the break of Yugoslavia, it was formally established at Slovenian Cinematheque in 1996, largely thanks to the vision and dedication of its founding director, Silvan Furlan. A passionate champion of cinema as an art form, Furlan sadly passed away just 2 months before Slovenian Cinematheque hosted the prestige FIAF Congress in 2005 in Ljubljana. Though it's not the official national film archive, the role belongs to the Slovenian Film Archive, the Archive Republic of Slovenia. The Slovenian Cinematheques preserve an important collection of distributed foreign film prints, copies of Slovenian films from 1945, and District Archive of Slovenian experimental film. Therefore, in recent years, we have increasingly focused on digitization and restoring small formats, with particular attention to this our collection of experimental and amateur cinema and also so-called home films, home videos. To make these films visible to the widest public audience, but also to place them in the certain context possible, we decided to make a feature-length documentary about our collection. This was a very inspiring journey for all of us, for all involved, researchers, screenwriters, directors, living authors of these films, DOP, talking heads, and almost for the entire team of Slovenian Cinematheque. And as they say, we don't embark on this journey because it was easy, but because it was difficult, but yet extremely exciting. At this point, I would like to ask my colleague, the head of the Film Collection and Restoration Department, Ivan Nedoh, and invite him to present the development of this our unique collection of Slovenian experimental films. Ivan, please.
Thank you, Zhenya, and hello to all. I just want to the beginning to correct the André. Our collection is not so big; it is small collection. So, but
it's big,
but okay. Based on the realization that there exists a rich yet poorly known and still unexplored field of experimental filmmaking in Slovenia, which developed in a parallel with a similarly vibrant creative output in other parts of Yugoslavia, I began the Slovenian Experimental Film Collection in 2012 in collaboration with Juri Meden. According to our financial capabilities, we also began restoring these films in laboratories outside the Slovenian Cinematheque and presenting them both at home and abroad. Soon we realized that the restoration process would be faster and more cost-effective if we had an in-house restoration lab with scanner at the Cinematheque. It also became clear that alongside the development of the collection, it was necessary to hire a dedicated curator who would be responsible for collecting, cataloging, researching, and presenting these films. Working with filmmakers who had created their experimental films independently was a unique challenge in the restoration process. Nevertheless, over the years, especially after equipping the laboratory with the within the Cinematheque, we have managed to digitize a total of 179 films. The collection now includes 120 experimental films on photochemical formats and around 1,000 digitized experimental and home movies. It would be a pity if only a handful of people knew about the existence of these films, and since I believed it was better to see these films than merely to write about them, I came up with the idea to create a documentary, propedeutic film that would introduce the richness of Slovenian and Yugoslavian experimental creativity to a broader domestic and international audience. I discussed the idea with Juri Meden and proposed that he direct the film in the spirit of experimental cinema, while he suggested that Matevž also joined the project as co-director. Juri and Matevž created an exceptional film, and it functions not only as a propedeutic tool, but also as an inspiration for our continued work. I often joke that they are Sigmund Freud of Slovenian film heritage.
Thank you, Ivan. At this point, it may be fitting to return to the main theme of this year's symposium, Film Archive Baguette Films. This phrase can take on various forms in different languages, including English. For example, it may be rendered literally as film archives give birth to films, more poetically and more commonly in practice as out of archives film come to life, or in a version of emphasis to a creative process, film archives create films. So our film Alpe, Adria, Underground grow up on this field. So film archives create films. The Slovenian Cinematheque, in addition to its work in uncovering the history of experimental film, collecting it and digitally restoring it, decide to take a step further to make this film part of a new film. In other words, to incorporate archival material into the documentary that would explore the significance and the context of their creation, while also presenting the films themselves and sparking interest in their viewing. Since the Slovenian Cinematheque does not have the infrastructure, of course, for professional film production, we partnered with the young production company Temporama, which took on the production framework of the film. The development of the script, research, archival restoration, and filming were created by the Slovenian Cinematheque as co-producer, and we also got the second co-producer. This was the National TV of Slovenia. This is the moment to introduce one of two screenwriters, it was already said, and directors of Alpe, Adria, Underground, our curator of the experimental film collection, Matevž Jerman. The other screenwriter and director was Jurij Meden, formerly the program director of Slovenian Cinematheque, and now currently the head of the programming of Austrian Film Museum. So, Matevž, it's your word.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Zhenya. So, before we continue, I would suggest that we watch a short clip from our documentary, which is the opening sequence. It's 3 minutes long, and it serves as a collage of different films that are included in our documentary. You can see more than, let's say, 70 different films in terms of snippets and so on. So just to explain also, the stills behind us right now were stills from experimental films that are part of the Cinematheque's archive and are included in the film. So let's see the video.
Psychonaut, črni blisk, vagaboj, idealist. 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 Mi smo prokleti, prokleti, mi smo prokleti, prokleti, mi smo prokleti, 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 prokleti. Sklon na tripe svaki klinec, mladi zoki, šumadinec, milioner, antikrimos, korpo papi, mladi midas. Sklon na tripe svaki klinec, mladi zoki, šumadinec, milioner, antikrimos, korpo papi, mladi midas. Psychonaut, črni blisk, vagaboj, idealist. Psychonaut, črni blisk, vagaboj, idealist. Psychonaut, črni blisk, vagaboj, idealist. Psychonaut, črni blisk, vagaboj, idealist.
So this was a little taste of our movie. Matevž, how was the path to make this documentary for this a lot of archive experimental film material, unknown, mostly unknown to the public?
As you know, it was fun, but also a long journey. But before we talk about maybe the approach to the documentary, I would like just to say a few words about the context of the Slovenian experimental film scene, especially in the time of the Socialist Republic of Slovenia, and the reasons why this tradition was fairly unknown until recently. Also, I must a bit apologize. I'm super nervous, so in case I choke or something, please, Zhenya and Ivan, you can take over from there. Yeah, so at first we must say that for a long time, the history of Slovenian cinema was basically seen as the history of feature fiction films, because, for example, over the past few decades, 3 extensive books on the history of Slovenian cinema were written and published by 3 different authors, but unfortunately, even short films are barely mentioned in these books, and not a single word is dedicated to the existence of experimental films or cinema in Slovenia. But as we could see from the opening montage of the documentary, that doesn't mean that there was no experimental tradition. It just wasn't recognized as such until recently. Because it's important to highlight that there was actually a really vibrant and exciting scene flourishing in the 60s, 70s, 80s, as in Slovenia and also in other parts of Yugoslavian Federation. It's important to note that this was a unique time marked by the so-called kino clubs or film clubs, which existed all over the country. These clubs were funded by the government, specifically by the organization called the People's Technique, in order to encourage the masses and the people to engage in the arts production and in various pastime activities. So every city had, for example, photography clubs, radio amateur clubs, model making clubs, and so on, and of course, kino clubs, which meant that anyone could join, use the equipment for filming, the equipment for developing and editing, and in the aftermath to showcase their films at different national film festivals, specifically dedicated to the amateur cinema, which was precisely what this kind of production was labeled as back in the days. So it was labeled as amateur cinematography because of the reason, because it was made outside of the official state-funded framework. Maybe in other places it would be called independent or different terms, but because of the term amateur, these films were kind of never taken seriously as part of the official film canon or narrative. So yes, and of course, most of these indeed amateur films were, for example, home movies or different attempts at short narrative films or documentaries inspired by what was or what could be seen in the commercial distribution at the time. But every now and then, some truly mesmerizing experimental works emerged from this context. And as I mentioned, because these films weren't made through official channels, they were neglected by state archives and institutions for decades. Meaning they mostly ended up under filmmakers' beds or in the basements or attics of their hairs. So over the years, it became harder and harder to access or even see these works. And this film of Slovenian film history started to fade in the forgotten darkness of time. Even scholars and film critics didn't know much about it until quite recently, and it's interesting to see after we screened the film how many not only international scholars, but also Slovenian filmmakers or critics approach us and say what kind of discovery this was for them. But luckily, Silvan Furlan, who Ženja already mentioned, the first director of the Slovenian Cinemateka, was very much aware of this independent avant-garde film production.
So we have read.
Ah, okay. Okay, I'll keep it short. So Silvan, in the 1996, wrote an essay titled "Was There Anything Avant-Garde?" And this was the first attempt to map this forgotten history, and the text is still incredibly relevant today, and has become a foundation for the research and also for the Cinemateka's special experimental film collection, which were established in 2012. So the text by Silvan Furlan also became the basis for the screenplay of our documentary, and we leaned heavily on his words, quoting paragraphs to highlight the significance and unique qualities of the films we are presenting in the documentary. So we approached the documentary together with Yuri in the way that we decided to give as much space to the films as possible. So we used a lot of split-screen compositions to showcase as much material possible, and we really tried not to be overly didactic or to explain everything too much, and instead we focused on sharing our excitement about this body of work. So the documentary now serves as a kind of catalog and an introduction to this previously unknown field, and is now traveling festivals and so on. So maybe it's worth mentioning for the last thing that one of the most important parts, or the unexpected byproduct of making the film, was the digitization of all the works that were featured. And now the vast majority of the Slovenian experimental film is digitized and available in digital form. So they're also being restored and regularly screened both at the Slovenian Cinemateka and recently also abroad on a monthly basis. And of course, there's still much more left to be discovered.
Yes, we got black carton. I know that he doesn't have 4 cartons. I will just say you are warmly invited. Tonight is screening at 6:45 at the Cinemateka. Thank you.
So thank you for keeping on time, and thank you for a wonderful presentation. Really looking forward to seeing screening the film tonight. Je vais présenter la deuxième intervention qui sera en français, mais il y a un long extrait d'un film. Donc, for those of you who don't have a good conduct of French, it should be okay. Donc, une présentation donc de Rada Sayegh intitulée Météores, gestes de réemploi par la création expérimentale à partir du fonds d'archives méditerranéennes Quatre. Rada est professeur associé à l'université d'études cinématographiques à l'université Saint-Joseph de Beyrouth. Elle est membre du comité de rédaction d'une revue montréalaise en ligne qui s'appelle Hors Champ. Elle a publié de nombreux articles sur le cinéma contemporain au Liban. Elle a dirigé également un numéro de la revue Hors Champ intitulé « Circuler dans les archives du cinéma ». Depuis 2020, et c'est un peu de cela dont il sera question aujourd'hui, son parcours s'oriente vers la recherche-création par l'écriture de textes protéiformes et par la mise en place d'un enseignement, donc des séminaires tournant autour de la création expérimentale centrée sur les archives. Elle a également réalisé 2 vidéos expérimentales reprenant des textes d'un projet plus vaste qui s'appelle « La fin du monde a déjà eu lieu ». Donc 2 films que vous pourrez découvrir sur la plateforme Zoom Out, si vous voulez. Je vous fournirai la référence. Nous avons eu le bonheur de la voir à Montréal tout l'automne, une partie de l'automne, dans le cadre d'une collaboration en recherche scientifique Québec-Liban, et dont une partie, je crois, de son intervention portera, en tout cas, ça découle un peu de son séjour à Montréal. Rada.
Bonjour. Bon, avant de commencer, j'aimerais remercier les organisateurs et organisatrices de ce symposium. J'aimerais aussi remercier le conseil de recherche de l'Université Saint-Joseph de Beyrouth qui m'a permis d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui. J'aimerais aussi remercier les personnes qui ont accompagné ce projet avec leur écoute et leur regard précieux, Chantal Partamian, Noura Ouaïda, Giorgio Basile et Evelyne Hleis. Je remercie également André Habib et Claudia Polledri qui m'ont si bien accueilli à l'automne dernier lors d'un séjour de recherche à l'Université de Montréal, durant lequel j'ai entre autres activités assisté au séminaire d'André sur les pratiques de réemploi cinématographique qui a sans doute déclenché le projet que je présente aujourd'hui. Météores est un film de réemploi d'images tiré du fonds d'archives méditerranéenne Quatre, une collection personnelle de films non-fiction en super 8 mm et 16 mm capturant des villes et villages de la Méditerranée orientale des années 30 aux années 80, amorcé en 2020 par Chantal Partamian, cinéaste expérimentale et archiviste. Météores est aussi le titre d'un poème coécrit avec Chantal en septembre 2023, à paraître aux éditions Le Merle, Cahier sur les mots et les gestes, avec le numéro Horizon Beyrouth Montréal. Ce geste de réemploi par la création expérimentale est né du souhait de déployer par le montage, entre images et mots, un échange poétique qui trace les voies de l'exil et imprime les paysages d'ici et d'ailleurs, d'une histoire chargée de mémoire et de deuil, et ce faisant, il mobilise un fonds d'archives qui, par la collection, la préservation et la restitution, contribue à lutter contre l'effacement et l'invisibilisation d'une histoire manquante. La question de l'absence et de la perte réside ainsi au cœur du projet Quatre et de l'essai filmique Météores, révélant des déplacements géographiques et filmiques où la mer, le ciel, les paysages et les corps sont porteurs d'histoire. À l'origine, en filigrane de Météores, le texte, échange poétique qui mêle deux voix et deux géographies, se trouve une certaine affection pour le ciel. Celui de Montréal, où vit Chantal, et qui me paraît si étrange et si différent de celui de Beyrouth, où j'habite, et que je vois depuis un certain temps en surimpression l'un de l'autre. Cette confidence faite à Chantal, avant d'entamer l'écriture du texte, a été suivie d'un premier envoi de sa part, l'extrait d'un poème de Baudelaire, « Le monde va finir », qui apparaît en titre de nos échanges mails tout au long du processus. Le monde va finir. La seule raison pour laquelle il pourrait durer, c'est qu'il existe. Que cette raison est faible comparée à toutes celles qui annoncent le contraire, particulièrement à celle-ci. Qu'est-ce que le monde a désormais à faire sous le ciel ? Je suis comme un homme lassé dont l'œil ne voit en arrière, dans les années profondes, que désabusement et amertume, et devant lui, qu'un orage où rien de neuf n'est contenu, ni enseignement, ni douleur. Le monde va finir de Baudelaire fait partie du recueil de poèmes en prose Fusée, publié à titre posthume en 1867. Comme on peut le lire dans la présentation de l'ouvrage, le titre Fusée évoque l'idée d'une montée rapide et fulgurante, comme une fusée qui s'élève dans le ciel. Cette image suggère la brièveté et l'intensité des textes de Baudelaire, qui frappent souvent le lecteur par leur concision et leur puissance évocatrice. Ces fulgurances tracent ainsi, dans le ciel d'hier et d'aujourd'hui, l'évocation d'un temps du désastre, un présent de crise, comme on peut le lire dans Baudelaire à la fin du monde et nous, un présent de crise qui marque le triomphe du néant et la défaite de la poésie, et font de la crise de l'agir une preuve que le monde va finir. Mais elles ouvrent aussi à une résistance toute politique dans nos temps du désastre, celle-là même de la poésie, rejoignant la pensée plus contemporaine de Günther Anders, qui fait de la certitude de la fin un défi lancé aux capacités humaines de résistance et d'action. Alors que le monde actuel est témoin d'un génocide, d'un herbicide et d'un écocide, en rendre compte revient à rechercher, par la résistance et par la poésie, une autre manière de l'habiter. Météores est un essai, une tentative de voir les images des territoires du passé, les composer avec leur fragilité matérielle et sensible, et créer un territoire filmique et géographique où passé, présent et futur se confondent, permettant aux fantômes d'apparaître. Donc, je vous présente Météores, qui est un film muet d'une durée de 9 minutes et 17 secondes. Et voilà, après, je reprendrai la parole. Le Fonds d'archives méditerranéennes Quatre contient en lui, et de par sa naissance, une histoire marquée par le désastre. Alors que Chantal Partamian collectionne des films depuis une vingtaine d'années, le désir et la hantise de retrouver des images du génocide arménien, cette fin du monde d'il y a plus d'un siècle qui marque sa naissance symbolique, a lancé son geste archivistique ayant mené au Fonds d'archives Quatre. Ce temps-là, celui d'un génocide renié, de la destruction systématique de ses traces et archives, de l'absence d'images, est aussi celui du déclenchement de l'exil, qui, même s'il appartient à des temps multiples, un exil qui aura toujours eu lieu, marque les origines du déplacement d'un peuple qui, jusqu'à aujourd'hui, est en quête d'une demeure, réelle ou imaginaire. L'histoire familiale sur laquelle revient Chantal dans son film Saint-Jacques en 2021 est une suite d'exils qui traverse géographie et génération, d'Ankara au Saint-Jacques d'Alexandrette en Syrie, avant son annexion par la Turquie en 1939, puis Alpe et Beyrouth. C'est une histoire de deuil successif, une blessure qui s'hérite, une faille géographique et temporelle. Cette filiation de la perte est aussi celle des images et de leurs multiples disparitions. À celle du génocide et de l'exode arménien que recherche Chantal inlassablement, se rajoute la destruction par les bombardements du studio de son grand-père dans les années 70 durant la guerre au Liban, puis celui de son père en 1989. La constitution de Quatre, archives méditerranéenne, porte ainsi cette généalogie de la disparition, ancrée dans une dimension géographique délimitée par la Méditerranée orientale. Celle-ci permet, tout en ouvrant à une multitude d'histoires et d'identités, de défier les frontières tracées par le passage de l'Empire à l'État-nation et dont la naissance a tout à voir avec la visée génocidaire, comme le suggère Sylvie Rollet. Si l'histoire des hommes n'a jamais été avare de massacres de grande envergure, le génocide est bel et bien une invention de la modernité, indissociable en tout cas de l'État-nation moderne. Tout se passe comme si l'État moderne ne pouvait s'imaginer que comme entité homogène, comme un nous dépendant de l'invention d'un autre, à expulser non seulement de sa terre, mais aussi de la surface de la terre. En ancrant les origines de la collection Quatre dans une période historique marquant le passage de l'impérialisme ottoman à l'impérialisme européen, qui, avec le traçage arbitraire des frontières suite aux accords de Sykes-Picot, annonce les conflits territoriaux des 100 années qui suivent, les images du Fonds d'archives Quatre traversent ces mêmes frontières et ouvrent à la reconstitution du mémoire, à une résistance poétique et politique, à un nouvel imaginaire indispensable dans nos temps du désastre. C'est tout le sens que lui donne Chantal Partamian lorsqu'elle affirme « Les archives créent un imaginaire au-delà de l'Empire ». Cet imaginaire passe par l'invention, par l'invitation à réemployer des images tournées pour la plupart par des touristes visitant la région, appelant à retourner le regard colonial, à décontextualiser ces images pour permettre l'émergence de nouveaux regards, de nouvelles voix. Le Fonds d'archives Quatre porte ainsi en lui autant les enjeux de mémoire et d'oubli que le geste de restitution, de mise en partage et de résistance. Ce projet incarne, dit Chantal, la possibilité d'une révolte douce contre l'anéantissement, nous rappelant que notre mémoire est un pilier essentiel de notre identité et de notre quête de libération. Si elle opère dans un contexte d'absence et de dispersion des archives, la collection personnelle initiée par Chantal Partamian est marquée par tout l'imaginaire et l'affect d'une archiviste et d'une cinéaste qui passe autant par la constitution d'un corpus sensible à une géographie et à son histoire, par le soin artisanal porté envers ces bobines de films, que par leur numérisation et leur partage en ligne. Dans Quatre, collection constituée de newsreels, de travelogues et de films de famille, chaque film est à la fois, dit Chantal, une capsule de vie et de culture, ainsi qu'un symbole de la lutte pour la mémoire. D'une fin du monde à une autre, d'un génocide à un autre, d'un exil à un autre, j'ai regardé ces images comme on regarde le temps d'avant la catastrophe, ou celui d'après. J'ai été sensible aux paysages en mouvement, à ces ciels, ces mers, ces montagnes, ces vallées, ces arbres, qui semblent porter la promesse apocalyptique lancée par la fusée baudelairienne. Comme on peut le dire dans Baudelaire, La fin du monde et nous, Baudelaire dit que le monde va finir dans un futur immédiat, collé au présent par les chaînes de ce temps, à moins que, comble du désastre, la fin n'ait déjà eu lieu. Le monde va finir parce qu'il n'a, dans le présent de l'Énonciation, plus rien à faire. Si apocalypse il y a, celle-ci n'est donc que la suite et la conséquence immanente d'une crise de l'agir qui marque ce présent baudelairien à l'intérieur de l'histoire. Ce temps apocalyptique, qui traverse toutes délimitation temporelle, historique et géographique, est fondamentalement lié à notre présent du désastre, celui d'un génocide, d'un herbicide, d'un écocide en cours, au silence qui l'entoure, à l'anéantissement d'une humanité qui, par son incapacité d'action, se détache d'elle-même. Gaza, ce n'est pas seulement Gaza, écrit tout récemment Catherine Libert. Je crois que j'ai toujours su, écrit-elle, je crois que j'ai toujours su que tout ce qui lutte, tout ce qui se dresse contre l'effacement du monde, contre l'effacement de l'histoire, a quelque chose à voir avec elle. C'est une ligne de front qui n'en est pas une, un territoire qui déborde ses propres frontières, une brèche dans laquelle se joue plus que son propre destin, plus que sa propre géographie. Gaza est ce qui résiste encore en nous, et si elle devait disparaître, nous serions finis. En regardant les images de la collection Quatre qui ont mené au film Météores, j'ai vu des paysages que je ne foulerai jamais du pied, des hommes et des femmes au regard que je n'ai jamais croisés et qui n'en finissent pas de hanter ces paysages. J'ai pensé aux arbres qui ont reconnu le poète palestinien Mahmoud Darwish, au mot apatride, cette autre invention moderne qui étymologiquement veut dire exclu de la terre des ancêtres. Je me suis demandé si cette demeure réelle ou imaginaire tant recherchée se trouvait quelque part sur ces images qui m'ont semblé contenir tous les temps, toutes les histoires. J'ai tenté d'y trouver un souffle, une lumière, avec en mémoire l'injonction de Günther Anders que j'entendais sans cesse. Il serait temps que la réalité commence. Merci.
Merci, Rada. We will continue, like I mentioned earlier, with a pre-recorded presentation, which will be given by Liz Watkins from the University of Leeds. The title of her talk is Colorization, Tutankhamun and the Film Archive. Very briefly, for Liz's bio, she is so from the University of Leeds. Her research focuses on histories of color, film and photographic archives, and the ethical issues raised by the digital editing and colorization of black and white photochemical images, which is a very actual, I think, debate, which we will pick up, obviously, at some points, I think, during this symposium. Her research has been supported by the British Academy and different other institutions. I just mentioning a recent publication that just came out on the journal, a special issue of the journal Visual Studies, which is called Colorized Histories, Reading Digital, Analog, Photography, and Film Archives Now, which just came out a couple of months ago, which you should go check out. So I think we're just going to hop on to the pre-recorded talk, and then I will invite the different people who have spoken thus far for a bit of a Q&A. Thank you. See you later.
The digitisation of photographs and films increasingly forms the first point of public access to photochemical materials held in museum collections. Yet the digital editing and addition of colour to scans of glass negatives, lantern slides, reels of film that were initially made and circulated in black and white formats remains a contentious issue among archivists and historians of photography and film. This presentation examines the ethical implications of colorization as it's been used in the interpretation and exhibition of black and white photochemical records of the 1922 incursion into the tomb of Tutankhamun. Photographs and films of the excavation taken by Harry Burton were intended to meet different criteria. Firstly, as objective records for an inventory of funerary objects. Secondly, to be used as illustrations for scientific lectures. And the third, as a source of public interest through a series of reports contracted to the Times newspaper, the Illustrated London News, and in exhibitions throughout the 1920s. The excavation of the tombs offered an ineluctably colourful topic: gems, flowers, enamels, gold, translucent alabaster vases, which the archaeologists led by Howard Carter and photographer Harry Burton sought to record using object cards, annotations on black and white photographs, and colour photography, the latter of which was met with limited success. For colour, it's important to note Carter's remarks on the hues and sonority of the desert, of silence and isolation, mauve-tinted sands gilded at dusk in relation to the enclosed linear architecture and ornate colouring inside the tombs as an act of the mythologization for public consumption. We'll return to the study of 1922 colour, but first to outline the retrospective digitisation and colorisation of a selection of Burton's photochemical materials which have been undertaken by several companies. You see these listed on the screen. Colorisations by composite films and unseen histories, both in 2022, were commissioned for projects marking the centenary of the incursion into Tutankhamun's tomb. So the questions that colorisation raises lie not only in the veracity of the colours chosen, rather it's important to note that the research methodology adopted by colorisation artists and companies differs from that of archive-led conservation and restoration projects. Digital colorisations of materials initially recorded and circulated in black and white formats prioritise the image composition and, as colour referent, cite the reconstruction of the space in front of the camera without sufficient recognition that image is mediated by photographic materials, such as the translation of colour spectrum into a black and white image, the use of filters, artificial lighting, colours reflected on objects that are adjacent to them and misread as shadows, and the effects of processing and printing in the photographic darkroom. This is different from archive-led methodologies which focus on the conservation of photochemical materials and the restoration or reconstruction of a colour scheme specific to the initial production and circulation of the film. The quotes on screen are indicative of the popular public reception of colorisation, as though it unveils something unknown about the past. However, the use of colorisation in the interpretation of museum collections for presentation to new audiences has been criticised by historians of film and photography for the prioritisation of image content over the history of technologies, practices and the environment specific to the initial production and circulation of each photograph and film. What I want to do is begin by considering how aspects of the discourse surrounding the recent colorisations of documentary records can be tracked back to the controversy surrounding the 1980s colorisation of more than 24 Hollywood studio titles, such as It's a Wonderful Life and Maltese Falcon, which incited debate around authorship, copyright and artistic expression. The colorisation commissioned by Hal Roach Studios and Turner Entertainment were intended for broadcast via US cable television syndication, and in the years that colorisations were released, averaged 80% higher rating than their black and white counterparts. The conversion of black and white 35mm film for video colorisation implemented a new layer over the studio lighting that had been designed for cinema screens in an attempt to convert the image and to the scale and format of TV screens. However, colour could disrupt the fine gradations of light and shadow that differentiated figure from ground in the black and white image. The uniformity of colour without the variations of reflected colour. A white object can appear pink if it rests on red paper. Of translucence or a shift in the tone of colour objects seen in shadow had the potential to disrupt the spatial logic of the film, image and text. Also note that the images were cleaned with little differentiation between the marks incurred during production and those accrued through circulation or storage. Controversies surrounding the colorisations and protests by filmmakers including John Huston led to the National Film Preservation Act of 1988 and in the USA, and formal recognition of commercial cinema as cultural heritage. That act stipulates that black and white source materials must be preserved unchanged. The phrase in FIAF's guidance that film images and text should not be materially altered. And further, as you saw, the US Copyright Office stated that colorized versions of films were eligible for separate copyright so long as they acknowledged whether the author of the black and white source material had given permission. Some of the 1980s colorizations were released on VHS tape. You see the accompanying notice here. That decision, as Wagner notes in the New York University Law Review, evaluated the consequences of new technologies on motion pictures, which found that panning and scanning adversely affects the work. Examples given include the effects of time compression from 24 frames per second film reformatted as a TV broadcast, which alters the pace and rhythm of the film, infringing the director's preference. 4 points to note and question in the way that colorization projects have been rationalized in the 1980s for fiction film and which persist in relation to documentary photographs and films today can be seen on screen. Colorization projects tend to invest in the teleological histories of technological innovation that retrospectively position their precedence in terms of lack. For example, the alteration in contrast through video noise reduction noted by Markle positions the physical qualities of the substrate of the image as an obstruction to the realist effect of colorization. The cleaning and lightening of the overall balance of the image is a recurrent practice in digital colorizations. So my research questions that frame this presentation are whether the addition of color to a black and white image ethically can emphasize or diminish details considered salient to meaning by the photographer, whether the use of lighting and shadow or framing of the image alters from Burton's photographic negatives to his prints. Both have been used as source material for colorizations. And how does the provenance of the photochemical source materials intersect with the provenance of the digital image? Can digital colorizations ethically refigure the hierarchies of lighting and information in Burton's black and white photographs? So back to 1922. The incursion into the burial shrines of Tutankhamun was documented using black and white glass negative photographs and film. An examination of photographic evidence tracks the ways that colour, deemed integral to archaeological study, were recorded using watercolour sketches, object cards, excavation notebooks, and black and white photographic prints annotated with details about different hues. Experiments with autochromes and agricolour photography were undertaken. Further, a selection of lantern slides were hand-painted for inclusion in the archaeologist Howard Carter's lectures. Photographer Harry Burton was a member of the Metropolitan Museum Modern Art New York Egyptian expedition prior to the work on the tomb of Tutankhamun. There were over 2,000 black and white photographic negatives held at the Griffith Institute at the University of Oxford and additional photographic plates in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art. This slide shows a cut-out print of one of Burton's prints, annotated with notes about the materials: silver, faience, lapis lazuli, and on Tutankhamun's throne. The Photographic Archives of the New York Met holds 53 Lumiere autochromes taken by Burton. Although variations in humidity, temperature, and lighting conditions proved problematic, Burton recorded some colour photographs using Agricolor and the autochrome process, a selection of which were published in the Illustrated London News. This indicates Burton's interest in colour photography and different lighting techniques in the documentation of objects identified in archaeological excavations throughout the 1910s and during Carter's expedition. The slide shows one of a series of Illustrated London News articles published throughout 1923 and 24. It shows, to quote, heavy sheet gold and richly adorned with glass faience and coloured stone inlay, and it states that, quote, that autochrome photographs in natural colours are taken directly from the originals. To those who have not seen actual objects, our pages afford the only means of appreciating the full glory of the treasures deposited in the tomb 3,000 years ago. Prints of the colour reproductions of the golden coffin of Tutankhamun and the gold portrait mask of Tutankhamun were for sale. Colour and photography were integral to the economic viability of the excavation and the visualisation of the tomb to audiences in London and the US and beyond. Another magnification, very finely painted with brush marks where dye was tested on the back of the paper masking around the slide. The lantern slide of this alabaster vase, you can see the translucence of the vase as its colour design becomes visible when illuminated from inside. Malby's own note on the side of the slide further reminds viewers of the effects of artificial illumination, the colour balance of light, its intensity, the distance of the lantern slide projector from the screen, potentially altering the colours viewed in a lecture from those viewed as the slides are seen and studied in an archive. This next section of the paper examines the shifting aesthetics of the image through a series of comparative analyses, so the black and white source materials, the digital scans, and the digital colorizations undertaken by different companies. Colorizations vary. However, as Christina Riggs notes in Reborn Digital, the little acknowledged politics of Burton's lighting design and the staging of this image, Carter is central, brightly lit, over the crouched figure of an unnamed Ferraris. This is underscored rather than queried by the act of colorization. Both Marina Amaral, who acts independently in this case, and Jordan Lloyd, as director of Unseen Histories, use Adobe Photoshop to colorize images. You see Jordan Lloyd's working file on screen. In my interview with Lloyd, he described the process of lightening and upscaling the image, and up to 40 layers of colour being applied across each object. The colours themselves researched using Griffith Institute resources online. Lower left is one of Burton's photographs of numbered objects as part of an inventory of the tomb. It uses flat lighting. The other two images are descriptions written by the 1920s Excavation Committee and the Griffith Institute website. Digital colour photographs accessed online were also referenced, but indicate a level of restoration to the funerary objects themselves, viewed in museum conditions rather than the tomb. The diaries of Minnie Burton, who was married to the photographer, recall Harry Burton's visits to the Howell Roach Studios in Culver City, where he researched the use of Hollywood studio lighting for his archaeological photographs and films. Each night they visited the cinema to watch tinted and toned films, including The Thief of Baghdad by Raoul Walsh, 1924. So Harry Burton, funded by the New York Met, purchased the movie camera and electric studio lights. However, the lighting requirement for cinematography proved impractical inside the tomb, yet the Hollywood studio lighting was used for a selection of staged photographs, performing the act of discovery. Here you'll see an electric cable under the reeds after a hole has been knocked in the wall. The electric lights are inside the inner chamber of the tomb. The photograph is staged. The hieroglyphs of interested Egyptologists and archaeologists are visible due to the raking light from the studio lamp set at an oblique angle to the objects inside the tomb. However, the source image used by Composite Films in 2022 is different to that used by Unseen Histories. It appears more harshly lit. The hieroglyphs are not visible. There is a reason. The scanner used at the archive was updated, but importantly, different source material was used for the later scan provided to Unseen Histories, working to provide the best available copy. On the left is the dupe negative, on the right is one of Burton's own prints. On the left, the dupe negative, you see it again here, was made from the glass negative because it had cracked. Composite films work for the television documentary included still images. Here we go, composite films. You see there's more shadow, there's less detail in the shadowed areas, whereas the image by Unseen Histories is from the dupe negative. More fine detail is available, it's visible in the shadowed areas. There are two more things to show. We can see that digital images are neither benign or equal. Their provenance, source materials and digitization methods vary. However, here you see an example of cleaning. A fold in the photographic print and the smudge at the top were removed. The print used as a source image had either faded or was sepia, but either way, it was not black and white when it was scanned. Composite films, where the image is on screen in a sequence of documentary, uses broader strokes, less nuanced colour. The colouring and resolution of still images tends to be aligned with that of the contemporary footage that surrounds it. From the film, areas to be coloured are sketched in, tracked across each still frame, the equivalent in digital, each section of the film emphasising figures of the landscape that are in keeping with Rick's critique. The question of whether instances in which injuries were incurred by workers and reflections of the photographer in the eye of Tutankhamun's mask here, which I cannot see but was part of an exhibition, ethically refigure or underscore colonial discourse is tenuous. But perhaps colorization offers a form of annotation or illustration, visualizing an past or exhibition. The colorizations themselves were commissioned for TV, digital and museum exhibitions. They're presented as derivative images, new work. The process of colorization isn't acted or declared. Licensing, like that which oversaw access to the tomb, mediates access to the archive, whereas independent colorizations based on image files outside the archive are not licensed in the same way, but are often entangled with Burton's work in online searches. The Griffith Institute, I will note, displays digital files of source images along the colorized works by Unseen Histories, for which it retains copyright. And I will end there. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions or would like to discuss colorization in general further, by email, Zoom or Teams, and my contact details are on the screen. Thank you so very much.
We do have a bit of time, so I would invite the people who spoke, so Ivan and Rada and Matevž and Xenia to come, and we'll entertain some questions, comments, remarks. You can probably hop there. So there will be mics passing around, so if you do have a question or a remark or a comment, please allow us to pass the mic on. I would maybe have a first remark. When we build panels, we try and connect them somehow, and sometimes the links are more tenuous. I think in this case, one of the things that came to me is the idea of a couple of things. One is the issue of invisibility, reclaiming some sort of history or restituting something, and even in relation, I'm just going to say this, although Liz isn't here, but the major invisibilization of the Tutankhamun excavation are all the Egyptian workers who were never mentioned. They're just mentioned as Egyptian workers. So I'm just going to add that in passing, a bit of a polemic note. So there is issues of invisibility and visibilization and trying to restitute, I think, some kind of history, which is counter to either a colonial history or to a canonical history in the case of the Slovenian. In both cases, what's interesting is that this reclaiming comes by acknowledging smaller format, 16, 8mm, 9.5, which is, runs counter to the official, I guess, history of cinema, which is, hegemonically considered on 35. Maybe, some kind of relationship between small gauge format and this reclaiming of a history that has been, in a way, repressed, hidden, and non-official. In the case of Slovenian format, so we saw a lot of films which were, from what I guess, 16, 8mm Super 8. Is this something that is also part of this restitution, reclaiming this hidden, somewhat part of film history, which was, considered for a long time amateur, home movies, and so on?
Thank you for the question. Yes, of course, I think the sole reason that these films were shot on small gauge formats is also the reason why they kind of sank in the darkness, let's say, of the canons, because especially, let's say in Slovenia, in the 80s, video art was a major movement, and filming on, let's say, Super 8 became more rare and rare, and also the possibilities throughout the decades afterwards to screen these films diminished in a way. So also with the digitalization of cinemas and so on, we came to the point where there's only maybe 3 or 4 cinemas all across the country that still have, let's say, analog 35 projectors, and maybe 2 that have a 16mm projector, and the Cinematheque has also, of course, 8mm projectors, but the technology throughout the years became less accessible, and this was probably also one of the reasons that these films weren't presented as often. But then again, the technology allowed us with the scanners that we acquired and so on to bring them back to life, I would say. Maybe even, yeah.
There is in ex-Yugoslavia, only in Belgrade, continuing alternative film festival where also nowadays young experimental filmmakers can present the films. There was in Zagreb, in Kino Club Zagreb, organized GEF genre film festival in 60s. But so this era of kino clubs slow down slowly, and then also becomes forgotten. This all segment of this film making.
I didn't do anything. But that maybe a question for Rada concerning a great part, and we can maybe ask Chantal also the question, but a great part of the collection is also this genre between, travelogues, amateur films, home movies, all things that, I guess, and in a way I'm kind of happy that we start with this type of films in a way, which for the longest time have not been part of the, I guess, the mission of film archives. They're not, for the most part, interested in amateur or home movies and so on. This is something that is changing in the last couple of years, hopefully, but is this also part of not only reclaiming the images taken in this region and restituting them in an interesting way, but also saying that these neglected formats are also interesting in a kind of larger consideration of history and heritage?
It's okay if I answer in French.
Yeah.
Donc je dirais dans un premier temps que la collection Quatre, qui est une collection personnelle, opère en fait dans un contexte géographique, historique assez particulier, dans le sens où il y a en fait les organismes ou les institutions qui préservent les archives, ce sont pour la plupart des initiatives privées. Donc dans ce sens, il y a beaucoup le fait qu'il y ait justement un manque dans ce contexte politique, un manque le rapport aux images et au passé est assez complexe. On privilégie plutôt l'amnésie dans le cas du Liban, dans le cas de l'histoire récente du pays. Et donc, il existait par exemple une cinémathèque. Il existe une cinémathèque nationale, mais son histoire est assez, elle est marquée par l'histoire du pays, par les différents bouleversements, et elle n'a pas suffisamment ou pas rempli ses fonctions. Et du coup, donc, ce sont plutôt des initiatives privées comme Cinémathèque Beyrouth ou la Fondation arabe pour l'image par rapport à la photographie, à l'histoire de la photographie, qui sont là un petit peu pour combler ce vide, ce manque d'image. Pour ce qui est de Quatre, c'est vraiment une collection personnelle. Donc elle est portée aussi par cette histoire personnelle, par cet imaginaire, par le désir de retrouver des images de la région. Et ces images-là sont pour la plupart donc peu visibles parce que justement elles sont en pellicule. Et même, je veux dire, même les images plus récentes qui sont en cassette sont aussi très peu visibles. C'est aussi donc de cette manière que ce genre de collection peut rendre visibles ces images, ce qui est intéressant aussi par rapport au geste de Chantal Partamian avec Quatre, c'est de les rendre disponibles afin que, sur YouTube, afin que d'autres personnes puissent les réutiliser. C'est vraiment une invitation à voir ces images et à les réutiliser pour les faire exister.
I think in both these cases, I think it highlights, in the case of the Quatre archive, the idea of archives outside of film archives as well, I think, which is an important topic, I think, that we will deal with throughout the next couple of days, and how one way of activating, and in a way, if only symbolically preserving these films, is making films with them. You know, it's one way of thinking about preservation and continuing these films. I think in the case of the Slovenian film, making the film is also a way of disseminating, but also preserving the memory of it outside of the archive in a way by making a film. And the same thing, I think, with your work, Ghada, there's something to that effect. Are there questions, comments? Noor, take the microphone.
Hello. So thank you for all the presentations. I have a question regarding Alpe Adria Underground, and as it happens often with these kinds of films, the films become also a site of an archive through the choices that you make of these films. And I think the circulation of this documentary, for example, is going to allow the circulation of the excerpts you chose. And we have a lot of examples where sometimes these films remain, but the original films kind of disappear through other circumstances. This is not the case here because this is a collaboration done like that. But I was wondering if this was something that you and Yuri thought about while making the film, that there's some kind of responsibility of the choice that in the end is going to remain, and this is what's going to be the most hyper visible as the tip of an iceberg of an archive.
Can I? Thank you for the question. I would say yes. Since the, let's say, early steps of making this film, while writing the screenplay and so on, we already wrote the line which ends the film. And so it's a bit of a spoiler, but it says the journey is only beginning, which means that this film is actually the first step, let's say, in the hopes of opening and disseminating this, let's say, forgotten or rediscovered history of experimental cinema. So, as I said earlier, just in order to make the documentary, we scanned more than 100 films, and if we would be waiting, let's say, for the funding from the Ministry of Culture in order, let's say, to take care of the specific experimental history, I think it would take years and years, and I'm not even sure if it would ever happen. But so the film was also an excuse to get this work done. And as I mentioned earlier, we're working now on a monthly basis. We're restoring corpuses by different authors that are presented in the film, and presenting them monthly, not only in the Cinematheque, but we already traveled, let's say, in Germany, Belgrade, so abroad, and like Harvard, for example. So the journey is actually only beginning, because now we are starting to discover many new authors, many new films that we didn't know about, and it's also a consequence of this film, which has now encouraged, let's say, many people that are approaching us and so on. And I think it's a first step also in terms of rethinking, the history of, let's say, global experimental film scene, because for many years it was canonized, maybe what happened between Vienna and San Francisco and so on. So these are the blind spots, and hopefully many more cases will emerge after. So.
As Matevž said, this is incomplete history of Slovenian experimental film, and maybe just one thing, that there were authors who didn't allow us to take their films in our film. There were different excuses for that, but even this happened. So.
Well, maybe it's worth mentioning one thing, that so no institution was taking care of these films. So many of them were ended in the hands of private collectors.
Under the bed.
And yeah, and some of them didn't want to collaborate from different reasons. So we're also trying to achieve let's say, also the help from Ministry of Culture to secure funds to buy these films and to include them in the archives, and to become part of national, let's say, heritage. Yeah.
Just one thing. After these films, we find out that there is a huge film fund or film collection of Victor Acimovic in Cinematheque of Northern of Macedonia, in which are also many films with a reportage from these festivals of amateur and experimental films, which were quite a lot more present than we know now. So it is really just a beginning of our journey to explore this.
We'll come back with Alpe Adria second part.
Yes.
Can't wait. Is there anybody else? Other comments? There's a question in the back, Léonce. Maybe identify yourselves if you wish to do.
Merci, bonjour à tout le monde. Moi, c'est Léonce Tira et je suis le directeur de la Cinémathèque africaine de Ouagadougou. J'avais juste une question par rapport donc à la première intervention. J'ai compris que vous avez eu beaucoup de difficultés par rapport à la réalisation donc, de ces films de réemploi. Je voudrais juste savoir pour la production, puisque vous avez fait une sorte donc, de coproduction, j'ai compris. Les fonds appartiennent donc à la Cinémathèque. Et bien sûr qu'il y a aussi les auteurs donc, de ces fonds, en plus de celui qui réalise. Je voudrais savoir, à la fin donc, de la réalisation de ces films, comment vous faites la répartition, la clé donc de répartition donc, des retombées au fait des films. Voilà. Est-ce que ça ne pose pas de difficultés depuis ceux qui ont réalisé le film, je veux dire les premiers auteurs, jusqu'à celui qui est venu pour prendre donc les archives pour réaliser, et les 2 maisons donc de production. Comment vous essayez vraiment de trouver au fait voilà, une clé de répartition pour ce qui est voilà, des retombées donc du film. Merci.
Des retombées des droits, Léonce?
Retombées, droits, même finances, pourquoi pas, voilà, économique, voilà, par rapport au film.
Authorship, if I can do a quick translation if you want. Basically, the idea of authorship, how do you negotiate, since a lot of the images in the film are obviously taken from other images, you know, from other filmmakers, and then there's the production company, and then there's the filmmakers themselves who are working in collaboration. How do you see the authorship of this film? Who does, not that who does it belong to, but who does it, you know, yeah, in a way, who does it belong to? In your view?
It belongs to the production house Temporama. It belongs to Slovenian Cinematek and belongs to the Slovenian National TV. It's Slovenian Cinematek has around 30%. The same, the Slovenian National TV, and the rest has the main producer, Temporama, because they were the ones who could apply to the Slovenian Film Fund to get money, because our income was our work, digitization, restoration, screenplay, and so on. So we all 3 own the film.
Mm-hmm. And basically there were licensing that was done for the filmmakers themselves in terms of, right?
Yeah, it was very challenging. It was very hard, yes. But we managed.
Yeah. But in terms of authorship, yeah, we were in contact with all the authors or their heirs, and we also covered license fees as much as we could from the budget. And we worked in close collaboration with the authors. So with many, we were going back and forth. We were sending them the edits, communicating a lot. So I wouldn't say it's a collective work, because we stuck with a specific, let's say, vision on how the film would look. And we gained their trust. So in a way, we also took these films and kind of reshaped them in the way for the documentary to work. But yeah, maybe in a way, it's a collective work.
A couple of things to say, but other questions, comments, remarks? Question ici en avant.
Merci, c'est une question pour Kada. Merci pour ce film. Je me demandais si vous pouvez nous en dire plus sur l'accompagnement de ce film, parce que beaucoup de choses se comprennent du sens de ce film par les mots que vous avez posés à la suite des minutes que vous nous avez montrées. Et je me demandais si vous considérez que Météores est un film qui peut exister de manière autonome, ou si vous le concevez comme un objet qui doit s'accompagner. Je pense que c'est une question qui se pose dans beaucoup de cas de films de réemploi. Est-ce que vous le voyez comme un objet qui doit être accompagné en amont, en aval, par des mots? Merci.
Merci beaucoup pour cette question. En fait, aujourd'hui, c'est la première fois que je le montre, et le processus a vraiment commencé par rapport... c'était quelque chose d'assez lié au texte, aux images, au film qui se fait, et puis aussi à mon travail et aux recherches. Mais la manière dont il a été monté et réalisé, d'après moi, fait qu'il existe en lui-même, parce que voilà, il y a un propos. C'est ce que j'ai essayé de faire. Et la présentation qui l'accompagne, je pense qu'elle fait partie de l'histoire du film. Elle peut être présente ou pas, mais je trouve que c'est peut-être un apport, mais un apport aussi par rapport à, pas uniquement au texte, mais au montage, à la manière dont le montage fonctionne entre images et mots. Et donc c'est quelque chose il y a une circulation, mais j'aime bien cette idée aussi que on peut retirer un élément et l'autre peut continuer à exister. C'est peut-être aussi de cette manière-là que j'ai tenté de concevoir le montage comme quelque chose qui est en mouvement. Et parce que même quand on découvre ces images aussi, c'est un processus qui commence au début, la première rencontre avec les images et la manière dont cette rencontre peut changer, peut affecter ce qu'on est en train d'en faire. Donc voilà, je sais pas, je suis partie un petit peu dans diverses directions, mais je pense que c'est parce que ça fait partie aussi du processus. Je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu. Merci.
Other comments, questions? We're all very hungry already.
Si.
There's a question up front. Ou en arrière, je ne sais pas qui parle. There, go ahead. Yeah.
Oui, bon, merci. Je suis Nedoh Bermudez, je suis archiviste aux Archives nationales ici du Québec, donc pas loin d'ici. Et ma question, c'est au niveau de la diffusion. Donc, c'est des belles œuvres que vous avez créées, beaucoup de travail, donc j'imagine que ça implique. Là. Mais pour la diffusion, comment pensez-vous, où pensez-vous les montrer, ces œuvres-là, pour qu'il y ait un plus grand accueil, une plus grande réception, et donc qu'ils soient connus, donc que votre travail soit connu en tant que tel?
Ça me semble déjà pas si mal, non?
Oui, mais en dehors d'un colloque.
This question for us?
For all of us.
You first.
Comme je le disais tout à l'heure, en fait, voilà, c'est vraiment une première présentation aujourd'hui. Déjà, je suis très contente de pouvoir partager ce film et les questionnements qui sont autour. Après, je pense que l'idée, c'est de continuer de partager, mais que ce soit dans le cadre de projections liées au monde universitaire ou dans le cadre de festivals, mais ou de le montrer, même de le rendre accessible en ligne, puisque voilà, pourquoi pas continuer aussi cette idée-là qui vient même de l'archive, qui est accessible, qui est à montrer. J'ai pas encore vraiment pensé à l'après, mais je pense que ça se composera graduellement. Et je ne fais pas de film depuis très longtemps non plus. J'aime plus de la recherche et de l'enseignement. Donc moi aussi, je suis en train d'apprendre à naviguer avec tout ça.
So the question was about basically distribution and dissemination outside of this, for instance, this conference. Has the film circulated a lot? Where has it been presenting? And I suppose that the context of presentation also changes the way the film is received or perceived. Presenting it during a archive, symposium is one thing. Presenting it at an experimental film festival is a different thing, or a documentary festival is a different thing. How is the film circulated, and how has it been received?
Yes, of course. The goal also of the distribution of the film was to screen the film with accompanying programs of restored experimental shorts, and I think we're quite successful at this right now. So we just returned from Regensburg, where we presented 5 different programs of Slovenian shorts and 2 programs of experimental films. So, for example, at Anthology Film Archive in New York, in the summer, there's going to be the film, and then 3 different curated programs. So, and we have a lot of already confirmed collaborations for this year and next year. So I think the goal is we're kind of achieving what we
and in Slovenia, the Slovenian Cinematheque distributes this film, so we are showing it in our room like we would be a commercial cinema. We are not, of course, and it's distributed around the so-called Kino network, which are small cinemas around Slovenia. So in distribution is in our land is okay. We are. How long is?
It's no. It's 98 minutes. So below the magic limit of 100 minutes.
But I think you have to see this film. So you are invited this evening, and then I am sure you will invite this film also in Cinematheques around.
I have a question, maybe, unless there's somebody else. I recently saw, I heard a presentation on a 1987 film that maybe Peter Bagrov could talk about, or the Russian speakers, a film called Asa, that was sort of documentary type fiction, directed by Sergei Solovyov, who was kind of a film fiction documentary that highlighted the, I guess, bohemian rock underground culture in Russia in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And a lot of the films that were shown, or the extras that were shown, highlighted this existence of a, I guess, underground culture in the 60s and 70s in Russia. And what was interesting to me is that a lot of the filmmakers that appeared for the first time, you know, like obviously these were apartment films that were made for a very, very strict circulation because of censorship and so on. On the one hand, we're happy because their films were being shown, but on the other hand, the film, you know, there were little clips, and a lot of the filmmakers, Kondratyev and among others, was slightly unhappy in the end because he said, well, you know, you're only showing a little bit of it, and it's too proper in a way. How did you negotiate that? Because these were very, how can I say, underground, hardcore anarchists. I'm giving them some kind of political, you know, edge, but there's an edge to those films. How did you, as filmmakers, negotiate that? You know, being honest and integral to the edge of these filmmakers, and try to be as, you know, faithful, I guess, to the spirit in which the films were made. Maybe to you, in the editing process, negotiating with the filmmakers. Did they see it? Are they happy with the result?
So we had many different filmmakers who collaborated with us, and I would say each of them had a completely unique requirements and I think type of, I don't know, communication. But we also, in the editing process, we decided to kind of adjust the chapter dedicated to a filmmaker in the way that it would fit their approach. So it kind of, I wouldn't say necessarily mirrors, but kind of pays homage to the spirit of their specific, let's say, poetics. So every chapter is also built in the editing in a special way that would kind of represent the spirit of the films. And yeah, it was quite different. We have, for example, an author which is a hardcore punk guy, like from late 70s until now. He made like 400 films, and he would just make them as he would make punk songs. And actually, contrary to the expectations, he was quite demanding with us. So we had lots of back and forth.
The punks are the worst.
But then on the other hand, we are talking about Karpo Godina, one of the most famous Yugoslav filmmakers internationally, and he completely gave us carte blanche. We could do anything, and then he just came and saw, and he was happy with it. So it was really, really different. But yeah, we took in consideration each of the opus, let's say. So I hope, and judging by the reactions by the authors, I think they're happy. So.
Autre question? Il y a une question ici.
Quick question. My question is really about the fact that these films come from a country that was part of a federation of states, and I'm wondering what the sort of, because you just mentioned one of the filmmakers was known as a sort of famous Yugoslav filmmaker, for example. So what kind of back and forth do you have with the others in Belgrade and other places and so on?
So yeah, our film is specifically focused on the experimental scene that was going on in Slovenia. But of course, as part of Yugoslavia, of course, but of course there were some epicenters like boiling pots, like Belgrade and Zagreb especially. And I must say that Belgrade and Zagreb really covered their experimental history really well throughout the years. There were many different books written. Their kino clubs some are still operating. Some of the festivals in Belgrade that were starting in late 70s are still going on. So I think they took much better care of their experimental film history. but we were the first one that made a documentary about it. But we were also thinking a lot about what are the differences, because, I don't know, in Zagreb, they had this school of thought. They called it anti-film, so they had a manifesto of what experimental film should be. Then in Belgrade, they had another theoretical approach, and they invented this thing called alternative film, which was kind of experimental film, but working in the framework of narrative films. And there were like many, many big authors throughout Yugoslavia. But we focused, for starters, on Slovenian experimental film, which was probably the least researched. So maybe, yeah, in the future years, as Zhenya mentioned, there may be a sequel or something. Yeah.
Of course, these films are as much part of the history of Slovenian cinematography as Yugoslavia cinematography. But today, there were some years there the collaboration was not quite good, but more and more years go further. We are now talking again with each other, but it's normally everyone wants to make its own history, but of course this is the part of the history of Yugoslavian cinematography as well.
May I add just one important thing? I think many times when people talk about Yugoslavia, they try to present it as this gray totalitarian country, but we can see from these films that it wasn't quite the case, because I think the spirit these films are conveying is that there was a lot of let's say, freedom in approaching film medium, a lot of playfulness, a lot of humor also. So I think it's a quite interesting thing also in this historical context to see. You know.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to go for lunch right away. We have a bit more time for lunch and a bit of time for discussion. So reminder, at 6:45, there will be the presentation of the Alpe Adria underground film. At 8:30, the films that were talked about this morning will also be presented. And we have the panel starting at 2 p.m. Here. And for those of you who have a pass, I believe there's lunch being served here. Maybe let Guillaume say a word, or no, it's here, lunch? Tu veux dire un mot? Okay, thank you.
Merci André, excellent modérateur, merci aux conférenciers. Simplement vous dire que nous offrons le lunch aux 335 Maisonneuve, donc à la Cinémathèque québécoise. Vous allez juste au sud, au coin de la rue, vous tournez à droite, vous faites un autre coin de rue et vous allez avoir accès à des sandwichs de viande fumée, smoked meat de chez Schwartz, un grand classique. So at 12:30 we're serving the lunch, including smoked meat sandwich, famous. Maybe we are in the middle of a match with New Yorkers about which smoked meat sandwich is the best.